Matthew chapter 1. Matthew, I don't think he intentionally excludes stuff, but he and Luke talk about the birth of Jesus, where the other two gospel writers don't really. They just pick it up with Jesus as an adult. Well, Luke talks about the actual night of Jesus' birth, and this is the story that I love to tell. I love it at Christmas time when the church puts everything else on hold for at least a couple of weeks. And we talk about, look at, think deeply about Jesus' birth, what transpired on that night. From Luke, we know that Joseph had taken Mary, his wife, right, to, they were, as a result of a census that Quirinius called for, they went to the town of their ancestry, which for Joseph, because he was the lineage of David, right? What, the city of David, well, that was Bethlehem. So Jesus was in Mary's tummy, and all the pictures I've ever seen depict Mary meekly riding on a donkey. Odds are she walked from Nazareth, and that's no small walk or ride, as the case may have been. We don't know which, but at any rate, there were no guest rooms available in Bethlehem. And a whole lot can be made of this. Everything from just bad time of year. I mean, Joseph and Mary were not the only people who had to go back to Bethlehem for the census. And so every place that had guest rooms filled up. By the time they got there, there was no room. Well, the other opposite extreme is a cranky owner or manager of an inn sent them away, and then in a moment of contrition said, well, I guess there's the barn. I don't know what happened. I don't know. We don't. What we do know is there were no guest rooms, and they wound up in a barn, which in all probability, you probably already know all this stuff, but it was a cave, and Mary gave birth there. And then, of course, the angels appeared to shepherds who were tending their flocks on hills outside of Bethlehem. Interestingly, not all, but many of the sheep that these shepherds tended would have wound up at the temple. And their destiny was to be sacrificed at the temple. They were purchased by people from far enough away from Jerusalem that it was not practical. Common sense just said, don't carry the lamb, don't drag it along behind, buy one when you get there. And that was common practice. There is something of an ironic connection there when you think about Jesus, the Lamb of God, who was sacrificed for the sins of the world. But, okay. Angels told the shepherds what was happening. They went into town and they found Joseph and Mary and the baby just as the angels had said. And they went on their way rejoicing. Well, sometime during this, time frame. Matthew writes in Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi, and we generally call them wise men. It basically depends on what scholar are you reading, and some say they were astronomers, but the fact is it's much more likely that they were astrologers. And they came from the east, meaning east of Bethlehem, which there's a lot of possibilities for that. And one possibility was Babylon. Babylon was a highly religious culture. Not God-fearing, but highly religious. And, well, let's read on. Wise men, Magi from the east, came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Have you ever thought, how did they know that this star was the announcement to them of the birth of the King of the Jews? Well, the closest I can come to a reasonable answer is either God told them, and I'm not, and I think they deciphered and discerned it, and the message was from God. But I don't think God spoke to them and said, "Hey, heads up, boys, the King of the Jews has been born, and you need to follow him." I just don't think that's what happened. I think they saw what they had not yet seen in the night sky, a star, which for most people is very difficult to tell the difference when you look up into the night sky when there's no ambient light to kind of distort. It's really hard to tell the difference between a planet and a star. I don't know. We don't know. And there are people who make conjectures. That's okay. Whatever. I don't need to know. And if you do, then you can get online and find, oh my goodness, it's beyond a Baskin-Robbins approach, right? 31 flavors of an idea. I think they were astronomers. I don't think they were Satan worshipers, but I think they interpreted events by what they saw in the heavens. And when this new heavenly light, whether it was a star or planet, came into view, they had been watching the night sky consistently, night by night by night. And so they knew what should be expected, right? It's not like, oh, that's been there all along. You guys just didn't see it. I don't think so. At any rate, I'm going to take these magi at their word. And what they said is, we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Well, that was their intention. I'm going to leave the whole thing of how did they know it was a star for the newborn king? I don't know. If we needed to know that, it would have been included, okay? So you can figure it out however you want to. I'm going to say these were not they were a little superstitious, but their occupation with the heavenly skies was not superstitious in nature. It was scientific in nature. You can believe whatever you want to about that. But they were convinced that the star, which they had seen, and it hadn't been there before, was an indicator, the message that the king, a king, and they didn't even say a king, the one who has been born King of the Jews. And you could probably, I mean, you can reliably put the in front of King of the Jews so that it could read, where is the one who has been born the King of the Jews? Well, this was an honest appeal for more information. It was according to God's design, I think, that they would ask Herod, but I don't think they realized, asking Herod, that was a grenade with a pin pulled. When Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Why would this disturb Herod? Well, primarily because he had been designated king of Israel by the Roman Empire. And something you need to know about Herod is he didn't tolerate rivals. His history is quite ugly. Murdered members of his family, and anyone who was a threat to him. He had primarily one method for dealing with their opposition, and that was you had them killed. Herod was not a good man. And, well, okay, Herod was disturbed because a rival apparently was somewhere near. Then this is a little thing that I think is a big thing. Verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, none of us have lived, I don't think, under a sovereign king who really was the ultimate ruler. Not in the sense that Herod was. He wasn't just a president. He wasn't a senator. He was, he could take others' opinions and input, but he didn't have to ask anybody if it was okay to do what he was going to do. He just did it. When that kind of guy, when that kind of person feels threatened, the rest of the city is going to know it. And oh, by the way, factor this in. This was a culture where news was transmitted exclusively by word of mouth. And don't think for a minute that the word of mouth wildfire went slowly into the village. No. This was the capital city. And things that happened in the capital city got picked up and spoken, and the networks of, it's not quite gossip, but it's very akin to gossip, and the city knew. And when Herod was upset, they knew pretty much his mode of operation was, somebody's going to get hurt here. Heads will roll. Yeah, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. They weren't so much disturbed by the news as by the threat of what Herod was capable of doing and what he had done routinely through his reign. Herod. Pause a minute. I don't want to accuse you of anything, but aren't there times when we're like Herod? We can be very threatened by new information, new people introduced into the situation, anything that would keep us from being the king of our little universe? Well, just something to think about. I'll pick it up again next time on So Care with Stevie.